Welcome, everyone. We're back with another podcast, and today's guest is Kathy Myhre of the Myhre Counseling Services here in Snohomish. Welcome, Kathy.
Hello. Thank you.
Well, it's lovely to have you. I've heard lots of very good things about you. Do you want to tell our audience a little bit about your practice and what you offer?
Sure. I have a general practice here in Snohomish, just right across the street from the library. My specialty is trauma work. Probably half of my caseload is post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, complex trauma, and dissociative disorders. But I also work with, good old-fashioned relationship issues, and just general stress and adjustment issues, women's issues. So
excellent. So with that what seems extensive full toolkit, how have you been able to help people through this COVID and the lockdown and then the slow release of the fears and anxiety? How can you help people with that?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important for people to realize that as human beings, we experience change in the same way that we experience loss. And so I sat down a while ago, and just in 5 minutes, I was able to identify over 20 different losses that have occurred with just the average person during this COVID-19 crisis. I mean, the loss of control, the loss of freedom, loss of connection with loved ones, loss of routine. Certainly people have experienced the loss of income, loss of jobs, loss of structure, loss of health.
Just amazing.
Just so many. Community, loss of community, loss of resources like hair and nails. Many of us have been looking pretty scruffy. And what we have to understand is that with each change, it requires minute adjustments in our system that can add a stressor to our system. And it's the accumulation of all of these minute changes that really increase our stress level. Clinically, we call it the allostatic load. It's when the accumulation of stressors on the system get to a degree where we can no longer maintain it. That's when the wheels start coming off the bus, right? And we start, having trouble sleeping. We start having mood issues. Even people who've never struggled with anxiety and depression, start to feel that way. We start to feel isolated. And even if you're managing that well in your life, we are interfacing with people that may not be managing what they're holding very well. So we really are going through this as a community, and it just takes so much to adjust to even the changes. If you have the privilege of being able to work, we're having to work very differently and getting used to doing things in a different way, which is hard. As moms that I had one client early into this. She just left a message on my phone call. She was a single mother with 4 kids, and she just left a voicemail that said, "I am not a homeschool mom," and she's trying to manage now and juggle work and with homeschooling 4 kids, and it was just overwhelming. So, and then the kids, yeah.
So if somebody calls and books an appointment with you with these kind of concerns with what's going on in our town, on our globe as a global community, how do they start? It looks overwhelming to a lot of people on how to get a hold of all these threads. How would you start that conversation?
Well, I would want to get an idea from them what the hardest parts of this adjustment is. And because everybody is different, right? We don't all think the same way. But then I also want to normalize it. And sometimes when people realize that they're not the only one going through this, and that a lot of the symptoms they're having and feelings they're having are normal responses that human beings have to multiple stressors, I can just visibly see them calm, you know. And then we want to pull the curtain back and just see where they're at in their general level of resilience. And, you know, resilience is the operating system that allows me to, I mean, it's the operating system that basically defines how I'm going to, as a human being, handle the stressors put upon my life.
So that's like the driving force of everything.
Right, and so I've seen this crisis as an opportunity for resilience training in a lot of people who haven't built that. And they are learning a lot about their capacity by what they're able to bear, and that can be really empowering.
So when those steps, say it comes out as you've said, you've pulled back the curtain and you're going a little deeper, and there's a well of anger around all these stressors, how can somebody address that in a healthy manner?
That is such a good question. You know, as a trauma therapist, we look at things a little bit different. You know, in just traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, which we've all been trained at, the goal is to ameliorate symptoms. Like if you come in with anxiety or depression or control issues or difficulty trusting or a pattern of lying or shoplifting, whatever it is, traditional therapy will want to, you know, diminish the symptoms. As a trauma therapist, I want to understand why the symptom is there. You know,
right.
You know, the person is not feeling depressed necessarily because they don't have enough serotonin, but maybe they're feeling depressed because they have multiple losses and traumas that they haven't grieved. And so what I'm finding with the whole COVID-19 crisis, and when I say that, I'm going to combine, you know, the virus and the fear of that with the stay-at-home orders, with now the political things going on, that's adding another element to it. It's just everything that's just kind of snowballing. And what these experiences can do, Katharine, is it can trigger deeper issues that we've never dealt with. And so because of the way that trauma is stored neurologically in our brain, if we don't work through it, that material stays lodged in short-term memory networks just below the surface of consciousness where it's easily triggered. And these kinds of memories are fragmented. And so when they flood, it's not necessarily the whole narrative story of what happened, but it's just the feelings or the thoughts. Trauma is stored in its ego-specific state. So it's like your brain has taken a snapshot of an adversity you've been through, and it's stored it at the stage of life or the age you were when it happened. So when that gets triggered, the emotions that flood are not adult emotions. They're 7-year-old emotions.
I was going to ask.
Reactions. Yes. And so what we refer to as trauma is anything that's happened in your life that is stored with an adrenal charge. And so as human beings, we have a natural resilience. And when, you know, adversity happens, if we have people in our lives, even in our childhood, that are able to comfort us and calm us down, there's a restored sense of safety and trust. And oftentimes our brain, even if it's something horrific, can integrate that. But what we call trauma is when something happens and you're not able to be comforted and calmed, then that memory gets stored with that adrenal charge, and it's a totally other deal. And that those memories then can be easily triggered. So I have a lot of people who have had early childhood trauma, or they've been controlled, they've been abused, and then the loss of control that's happened with Corona. Now you have people telling you where you can and can't go, what you have to wear on your face. It triggers these memories of control, and they just flood with fear or anger, and they don't even know why.
Yeah. So could we speak to what trauma looks like socially, what trauma looks like individually? Because the word is very big to people, but for someone else looking at what somebody is talking about that their trauma is, it may not look like a trauma to the other person. It doesn't look big enough. But the trauma that's happened individually can be what seemingly looks quite small, but it's stored cellularly, correct?
It does. It gets stored in our bodies. And even in the study of epigenetics, we're finding, this may seem confusing to people, but we're finding in the study of epigenetics, and epi means above, so it's above the gene. We're finding that even in moms that have significant trauma, that the trauma is stored cellularly. It can even be passed down to the infant.
Right.
So when we distinguish between what we would call big T and little t trauma. So the big T trauma are things like, gosh, I was molested by the neighborhood pedophile at age 7. Katharine, that only has to happen once for it to really jack up your system, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And if you dissociated, or you didn't have a safe enough or available enough family system to work through that, those memories get locked into your neural channels, and they're stored mostly as implicit memories, thoughts and emotions, body memories. But a lot of the people that I work with, boy, they haven't had that level of trauma, but they've had lower levels of trauma where, like, that would be like raised in a family system where there was a lot of shame, where emotions were suppressed, and if you cry, I'll give you something to cry about. Where they've had numbers of ongoing, what we would call like psychological insults, but the frequency has been chronic. They can end up with symptoms as severe as that first person. So there's a lot of factors at play. You have to look at the age the person was when the event happened. You have to look at their individual constitution, how long the event lasted, whether or not they had what we would call a compassionate witness, whether they had someone they could talk to about it, and just many other dynamics to understand. So it's not accurate to say, well, why do you have that level of symptoms? Because your trauma wasn't as severe as this. It's just not so easy.
It's not. And I find that societally speaking, trauma and those and speaking about it can be quite a guilt building, so to speak, shaming, and that keeps people quiet. How can you help someone move out of that? Well, my group of friends might think less of me if I go get help for how I'm feeling about this trauma. I might be shamed or guilted into not doing anything. How can we help that?
Yeah, so Katharine, that's a great example of the regressive nature that in which trauma is stored. So when I'm a child and something really painful or bad happens, if there's not an adult that steps in, like let's say that I'm raised in a family system where my alcoholic dad drinks too much, rages, and just physically assaults me. If he doesn't come back and own that behavior and say, gosh, I'm so sorry I treated you that way, that wasn't right, you didn't deserve that, daddy has a drinking problem and I'm going to go get help for it, the child is going to assume that they caused the behavior, right? So now that thought that I've caused this behavior, I've done something bad to make daddy, act that way, or if I'm told that overtly,
it's always your fault.
that message is now embedded in the experience. So now that I'm an adult and I experience something adverse, like my boyfriend breaks up with me or I get fired from my job, that feeling that I must have caused it now just floods with it. And so so we have to, what I do is I help people identify the most common cognitive distortions. Like, what are those feelings that you get often that just flood, even though you know it's not true, you just can't shake it. And then we do something called an affect bridge, where we try to identify where it is the first time in your life that you felt that way.
Wow.
And oftentimes that will be the memory that we target. I practice a modality called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so that is a clinical tool that allows the brain to release these memories that are stored in their ego-specific state, so that your adult mind can resolve it. And so that might be a memory then that we would target with EMDR.
So in that modality, which is fascinating, by the way, I know just enough to
be dangerous.
But with that, so this modality will release the charge. It doesn't necessarily erase the memory, correct?
No, yeah.
Because people have the understanding of thinking that if they do something like that, that all that will go away, but that's not the case.
No, it's just that when you think about the memory after EMDR, if it works for you, it feels like it's in the past, that it's no longer happening now, and
it's
you're
not
thinking
hurting
about
you
it as an adult, because that is the essence of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
Is that your brain actually thinks that it's still happening, right?
Or
and
it's
so,
happening again.
Yes. Well, yeah, your brain actually thinks. So if you had, for instance, a sexual assault or a physical assault at, let's say, around the age 11, when you were little, small, and you couldn't defend yourself, and you didn't have resources and power, and then you get into a situation that triggers fear, your brain cannot decipher between perceived danger and actual danger. And that's one of the essence, I think that's one of the things we have to understand with trauma. And even how trauma can intersect with racism, for instance, is that just because something feels uncomfortable to me doesn't mean that I'm not safe, doesn't mean it's dangerous to me. And so part of trauma, trauma work is that our brain cannot tell the difference between.
So is that, then that is also where when we look for, I'm making assumption here, look for someone to speak to and find some comfort, they can't decipher the trauma for the person and then the new incident and why they're so upset. Is that correct?
Correct. And this is, we're talking about trauma as if it only affects a few of us. This is normal stuff. Even relationally, in relational work, our brain has this auto fill-in feature, and our brain's not even polite. It doesn't even ask our permission. It's like I experience something even relationally, and without permission, it activates something that happened in my past, and then the meanings all of a sudden flood. So for instance, we get our relational rules from mom and dad. And so if I had an experience where, I was raised by a mom who had untreated bipolar, and when, you know, when she started getting excited and, sorry, I'll have to, it would result in a hospitalization. And now I'm married to someone who's expressing strong emotions. I have this fear of abandonment just kind of flood me, and I don't even know why. If I have a painful relationship with my dad, for instance, and now I'm married to someone, or I have a painful relationship with my mom and I'm married to someone, my brain will attribute the same meanings that happened in the earlier event to this one. And,
wow. Kathy, that is so powerful.
Yes, and so oftentimes what causes the relationship struggle is not necessarily the adversity, but the meaning that I ascribe to the adversity, and how I think about what happened can affect me more than what actually happened. And the meanings that automatically get ascribed, this is not even a conscious, operation, it's subconscious. It feels so true that I just assume it's true, you know.
So I know that we're coming to the end of our time, and I so am fascinated and appreciate your time. I can't tell you how much it has been a delight to have the chance to speak to you. And for everybody out there, if you feel like you need some help, find somebody, call somebody.
Yes, you're not alone.
Yeah, once light is shown on something, it becomes easier to deal with, correct?
It does. And that's a simplification. I mean, sometimes some of us have been through so much adversity that we just can't work through it alone, and you need more than just a listening ear. You need a person trained in, and how the neurobiology of trauma and these things. So please don't hesitate to reach out for help. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of self-respect.
Oh, good. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I am going to wrap this up. And once again, so appreciate. We've been talking to Kathy Myhre of the Myhre Counseling Services here in Snohomish. And just quickly, where can they find you? Where is your office?
My office is right across the street from the library here in Snohomish.
Excellent.
And yes, and I am in the, you can find me, you can just Google me. I'm not hard to find.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much. And I hope the rest of your day and week goes smoothly.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care now. Bye-bye.
Hey everybody, if you have enjoyed this video and you've seen some of the others, please give it a like and be sure to subscribe to the channel for future interviews that are coming up, and learn more about the local practitioners you live around and with here in Snohomish. Thanks.